But it's important for you to learn that language because it will help you in your career. It will help you with your educational aspirations. And imagine when you have that language under your belt, you can then market yourself to be able to work to get better jobs, for promotions, et cetera, et cetera. You know, the sky's the limit for you if you're in an English speaking country and you are able to then master that language.
Hello, Simone. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Marty. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. And for anybody listening and for anybody that is not yet familiar with who you are and what you do, can you introduce yourself to it?
Sure. That's always a very interesting question because, you know, we tend to lead with what we do, our
Mm,
profession, and I'm trying to steer away from that too much. But I guess it's a part of my identity, it's part of who I am, and so forth. So I'll give you a bit of a mix. So, hello, everyone. Simone W. Johnson Smith. I need to figure out a way to shorten my name. I saw somebody who just had like a very nice shortened first name and last name. So I'm working on that. So it was my maiden name plus my husband's last name. He loves when I use his last name. And I've kept my dad's out of respect for my family. But I am an immigrant American, originally from Jamaica. I've been here now 20 plus years, 23 plus years, maybe 24 this year. I arrived in August of 1998. You know, that began my journey. And I am the oldest daughter. And so there's a lot of responsibilities that comes with that, as you can imagine, within immigrant collective communities, being an oldest child, it comes with a lot of responsibilities. So I've had to lead my life as such, careful of my mistakes and be aware that other people are watching and coming behind me. So, and I have one sister and four brothers. Professionally, my career has taken me some interesting places. I've had some experience while I was in college working in banking and in the banking industry, and then after that with the federal government. So I've had a few years, about 5+ years with Department of State, working as a U.S. diplomat, living overseas in different countries, traveling back and forth out of the Washington, D.C. area. And then after that, transitioned to another agency, Homeland Security, where I work in the immigration space. And I'll just leave it at that. I won't say too much further, but immigration has been part of my life forever, right? I studied it in my undergrad, did a master's thesis in immigration, the brain drain from the Caribbean. I did it quite a bit with Department of State, and I'm now working in the space now going on 12+ years. So, and I have a podcast talking about the immigrant experience in America. And we now have over 107 episodes where we interview immigrants from countries all around the world living in the United States or other countries. We've done interviews with people living in Japan, in the UK, in Germany, and we have other interviews coming up as well. So as you can see, my life is full, and I am really enjoying where I am right now. So thanks again for having me.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I very much like that everything really revolves around immigration. Like you said, that it started at a very young age for you, and I suppose it's still continuing on with your professional life, but also with your personal life. So for anybody listening that is on that boat as well of being an immigrant, I'm sure that this episode is going to be very, very enticing. But to get a little bit deeper into what you were talking about with your experience as an immigrant, could you tell me a little bit more about the positives and the negatives of that? What has been your experience in terms of course, there are always the good things, but also the bad things. Could you share some of those?
Sure, sure. You know, when we left Jamaica 20+ years ago, I can remember my brother and I joking and kind of dreaming about what life is going to be like in the US, because we would have our cousins come to visit us. And, it was just so exciting whenever my aunt or uncles would come and they would bring us things, and the smells and the taste that we weren't used to normally. And it was exciting. And plus we back then we had one TV in our home, and we basically had two one or at one point we only had one TV channel, and then we had two TV channels, and we would only get exposed to American movies or media only through VHS, right? So I'm probably aging myself a bit, right? So only through VHS. And so we had very little exposure to the outside world, but we knew enough. I mean, we studied about it, people had conversations. And even till today, I do notice that people on the island are very outward focused, right? They want to know what's going on in the rest of the world. It's a very small island. I want to say 2.7 million people. It's probably a bit more than that now. But because the island is so small and cannot absorb all of the people it's pushing out through the educational system, education is a very big issue on the island. Everybody goes to high school, and most people go on to taking their A levels and to university. So it's not able to absorb. So a lot of people are very outward focused, where they're looking to see where they can find potential work opportunities, maybe in Canada, the UK, the US, or some other country. So you'll find that when you go on the island, people are just, they'll know a little bit about a lot of places. And so I had not very much exposure growing up, but we knew enough and about the media and so forth. We used to watch Rambo movies and all of that. And my brother and I would joke about us that will be opening a Jamaican restaurant. I had no idea I can't really tell where we got that idea from. But now that I've lived in the DC area, and now in the Atlanta, Georgia area, there are Jamaican restaurants everywhere. And I don't know where we had that kind of, like mindset that, oh, that's a thing to do, but we would joke about it. And we really looked forward to the adventure of moving to a new place. And so we left, and just excited about the new changes. But my first winter was quite interesting. I remember crying because it was so cold. I hadn't experienced any place like that. My family went straight to Kansas City, Missouri, which is the Midwest. Very cold. They have ice storms, lots of snow. I remember, driving, and my car just sliding down, like different parts of the road, and just being so scared. So those were, like initial feelings of challenges that you have, and, learning to dress properly because of the drastic change in weather. Learning how to trying to understand people's comments, like, do they have cars in Jamaica? I didn't know whether I should be offended. I didn't know if I should be offended, or this person generally just didn't realize or didn't know much about the rest of the world. And so the irony is that Jamaica is so small, but we know so much about the US, and the US is so large and has so much technology and exposure, but yet they know nothing about the rest of the world. Well, the perception is there that people here don't know very much about other countries. And so that was my initial feeling and challenge of trying to understand people's mindset and how they would communicate with me. And then, I started working at Kmart, my very first job, and traveling, taking the bus to go to take classes to transition into university, because I had finished high school prior to coming here, and just kind of unraveling all of that. When I was on the island, my dad drove me everywhere. I lived minutes away from home. I walked to school, I walked home by myself, right? And so this was new for me, to be taking transportation literally maybe an hour and a half away by myself to go take college classes so I could apply to university. But, I know now today that I had taken the pre-SAT while in high school in Jamaica, and I could have used those scores to apply to university. But that's the part of the challenge as a new immigrant to a country. You don't know all of the information on the ground when you first land, right? And so unless you have a social network of people who are going to be guiding you and saying, this is how you get into school, and this is what you do, and this is where you apply, sometimes figuring that out can be quite a challenge. And that was very much so for me. So so the weather, communication, educational aspirations that I had, figuring that out. And then, juggling school and doing a little part-time job. This is what we do as immigrants. Everybody chip in to do something here and there to kind of help out the family with the adjustment, right? And like while we had family support, we had a home to live, our aunt and uncles helped us, took us in and everything. We still had that expectation that everybody would kind of work and pay off our plane ticket and things like that. I remember very clearly that's one thing that my siblings and I did. We all worked and paid off the person who bought our tickets for coming here. So those are some initial things that I can remember. And I remember struggling actually with the language as well, because we were taught British English and struggling to learn the way to write American English, how the pronunciations or my very thick Jamaican accent, and people not being able to understand and asking me to repeat myself all the time, and getting frustrated and just feeling sometimes exhausted because of all the information you were taking in. In a new place. It can be psychologically exhausting as you're learning, you're eager to learn, but all of the information that's coming at you can really wear you down. And so those are some of my initial challenges, not to draw this out too much, but that's what I can remember.
Perfect. And I do very much like the spectrum of things that you've mentioned, that like you said, it's both the physical of the cold and also the psychological and the emotional. And there are a lot of different roller coasters that we go through in the new country. So that's I feel very, very realistic. But tell me a little bit more about the communication aspect of it. I thought that was very interesting, that like you said, beyond the, let's say, the factual part of communication, like you said, you have cars and so on, but I suppose a very different mindset of the people in general, not just about geography and the world, but I suppose about even daily kinds of things and daily situations. How did you adapt to that, perhaps a different style of communication? Was it just through immersion, or did you notice that, okay, these people talk like this, so I should maybe mimic that? Or how did you deal with those different parts of communication, or a different style of communication?
That's a very interesting question. It has taken me 20 plus years. I'm still learning. I remember writing just how I normally express myself and getting critiqued, constantly. This is not how we spell this word. This is not how we do it here. And then the different cultural slangs, as you would call it, or in the local vernacular, how people speak, depending on the group that you're with. The US, as they call it, a melting pot of different cultures, or a salad bowl of different cultures, right? So it depends on which group you're around. You're hearing different ways of expressing, of expressions. And so for me, it got really confusing, and over the years has exhausted me. And I've expressed that throughout my podcast, where you feel there's a conversation out there where people are saying that we should try not to code switch and to really just be our authentic selves as we move through life. But I found that as an immigrant in a new culture, that can be very challenging, because you have to really adapt yourself depending on the room and space that you're in, and depending on the audience that you're communicating with. Yes. And so for me, if I'm speaking to somebody who's African American, who's local here, there's a certain way that they communicate, certain words that they do, certain nonverbal cues and vibe, that the way they express themselves. And so um, being my regular Caribbean Jamaican self, that really never really jived with that group. I found that I've had to code switch, if you may. And I had to, at times, seek guidance from some of my cousins who had been here longer than me, or the ones who were actually born here and who find the culture to be more organic to them. Like, help me understand, like, what does this mean when they say this? What does this mean when they behave this way, and so forth? If I'm communicating with, for example, someone from the Indian culture or someone who's Chinese or Korean, everybody has their little ways of saying things. And so you just have to just be, keep an open mind and get out of your comfort zone. And I was always bringing somebody home with me to our family dinners, like, whether it's someone who's native to the US or another immigrant from another country. When I went off to college and lived on campus, I had a friend from Cameroon who came home with me, a friend who's Indian who was living in the Bahamas with her parents. She came home with me. Several other friends, native, not Native American, like Native American Indian, but people, whether it was someone from who would be considered European American, or from whatever culture. I would take somebody home on a Thanksgiving, because when we're living on campus, some people would be living away from family and didn't have support in that particular city. I was fortunate to have family within 30 to 45 minutes away, and I had a car. And so they would come home with me during Christmas time for Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving dinner if they didn't go home. And so I really made an effort to mingle and to be around people, to learn people's culture, to just be curious, to ask questions, to listen how they speak, how they communicate, the words that they use. And the more you really get out of what people would call an enclave, which is basically when you go to a new country, you stay within that community, the people who speak your own language, maybe the people from your own country, and that's called an enclave. But you end up becoming very comfortable in that space. You don't really get stretched. And so for me, I find that it was important to me to kind of venture outside of my own Jamaican community or own Caribbean community where I was living. I was in Spanish class, I was in French class in college. I would go salsa dancing. I would take salsa dancing classes. I would go out with my friends, hang out, after work in the evenings or on the weekends, just to kind of broaden my perspective and sense for different cultures, so I could learn how to communicate with other people. So, yeah. So in a nutshell, I'll leave it there. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit now.
I like everything that you're saying because I feel like a lot of people listening to this might very much relate through that experience of perhaps moving to Australia. A lot of the people that I talk to have moved to Australia or to any other part of the world, and I feel like some of them might be in the same boat. And I feel like I've experienced that a lot with the Polish community, both in Australia but also in England. I've met people that have lived in the UK, for example, for 20 years, and they spoke basically zero English because they just stayed within that community that, okay, my friend is Polish and my cousin is Polish and this and that. And you just never leave that, like you said, that enclave, that comfort zone of being with your own people. And then you realize, well, I didn't actually learn anything. I didn't quite grow in that regard. Obviously, there are different measures for growth than just the language, but it is a big part of it. Like you said, bringing other people home, learning how they communicate, how they show themselves, how, like you said, their body language cues and so on. There is just so much knowledge that we can steal, so to speak, from other people that we just surround ourselves with. And what you're talking about makes perfect sense with doing that. But something that I also found very interesting, something that you mentioned before, that in Jamaica you would have learned the British accent, and you've clearly, I don't know if you got rid of it or if it's something that you switch on and off for yourself, or how did you deal with that?
Well, I forgive me if I said accent, but it's more of the British English, the way of spelling and writing.
Okay.
Our
Okay.
system of education is from being a former British colony. Our system is from the British system,
Sure.
but we don't necessarily have the British accent. It's actually very Jamaican. It's very different sounding. Um, and it comes out after being here so long and speaking Spanish and, being exposed. My accent has really taken on a new sound. I actually have no idea what I sound like. So I just speak comfortably, whatever comes out. I'm hoping that people understand me clearly. And if I have to repeat myself, then I do so. But I've lost quite a bit of my thick Jamaican accent. But it comes out if I'm upset or if I'm happy or around my family, around my sister, depending on who I'm talking with. It just comes out authentic, like just naturally, like very raw. And somebody was like, "Whoa, what's that? What did you just say?" But but yeah, no, not the British accent. I would have to really practice to speak like a British person. So,
I like that. I like that.
yeah.
Perfect. And I like the little lean in that you made here with Spanish, and that's something that we briefly discussed last time, and I would very much love to hear about your experience with Spanish. And I very much enjoyed what we talked about last time about Spanish, but if you could share your experience with, maybe, like you said, you started in college, but was it just part of your maybe extracurriculars, or why did you start that in the first place?
So, yes, very interesting. So, as I mentioned before, the Jamaican educational system is one that's geared towards educating its population to work overseas because the island is so small. It can only absorb so many people. So Spanish was something that I studied from seventh grade in high school, from my very first year in high school. And I did well in Spanish and ended up picking up French from eighth grade in high school. And those two languages followed me all the way through end of high school and through my undergraduate, right? So I studied French up until my junior year in university, and I ended up graduating with a degree, undergraduate degree in Spanish. So those two followed me. And because that was offered in my high school, I took advantage of it. I was very much into international relations from high school and learning languages. And when I found that it came naturally, excuse me, when I found that it came naturally for me from seventh grade, I continued it. It's something that I enjoyed. I had the energy and the motivation to do it. And so I continued all through high school and scored very well in my final exam. So the way that it's done in Jamaican high school, you study from seventh grade to 11th grade, and you take one final exam, and that basically determines if you pass what we call the Caribbean Examination Council. It's graded, and you get a score, 1, 2, or 3. And I did very well in Spanish. I think I got a 1, which is basically an A. And so that was encouraging to me. Spanish and French, that I scored very high in those subjects, and I continued them in my undergraduate when I came to the US. And but it was interesting. I loved it. I mean, I would have index cards everywhere. I mean, I would conjugate my verbs, and I would have things posted around my room all over the house. I was walking around practicing all the time. Um, my French teacher, I am in touch with until today, 20 plus 3 years later. She was my guidance counselor and French teacher, and she taught us, I think she was trained on the like French from France, because you have other countries that have different versions of French, like Haiti, or different countries in Africa that has a different version of French. But we remember talking about Paris and France, and I ended up traveling later on. But I think when you're learning a language, you really have to immerse yourself into that. And I really picked up a lot of skills from those ladies back in high school, using index cards, just daily studying and getting in there and putting in the time to review your verbs and practicing. And even though the full immersion where you literally, you know a language when you start dreaming in the language, right? And that didn't necessarily come for me until I traveled and lived in Mexico with Department of State, where I had to work daily in and use my Spanish in communicating with people I was working with. And so that really gave me the full immersion. I'd go to the grocery store, everything was in Spanish. Go to the gas station, everything was in Spanish. And so after 2 years, that really helped me to feel like I had a full immersion where I started dreaming. My thoughts would just be in Spanish. I would respond in thinking in Spanish versus back and forth between English and Spanish. So I forgot your question. What was the question?
I think you answered it very well. I think that was
I was like,
perfect.
I hope I'm responding to her question. I feel like I'm veering off a little bit.
No, that was perfect. That was perfect. And I liked your point about motivation, like you said, having that motivation, I suppose, like you said, with high school, getting that good grade is a very good motivation. And then, like you said, living in the country is also a wonderful motivation. But what would you say it is for you now? Do you still feel motivated to practice, to study? Is it still something that you maintain in your daily life, or has it gone into the background for you?
For Spanish, yes. I find that after coming back to the US after living abroad, I actively maintain my relationships with my friends who speak Spanish, and I try to practice when we're communicating together. I go to salons where or businesses or grocery stores or wherever where I am forced to use my Spanish. And I'm very happy to do so if I'm with my family, if we go somewhere and there's somebody, we go to like an ice cream store, a Latino ice cream store with that, they don't speak much English and you really are forced to communicate. I'm happy to step up and get the little practice that helps me maintain that. So I really actively in my everyday life today, you make an effort to interact with that community, and every chance I get, I try to use it because it will literally will go dormant. My French has gone a bit dormant. It's there. I can still read, I understand, but because I never was fully immersed in a French speaking environment, that speaking part is not as natural for me, but I definitely can read it. And interestingly, you see my daughter's room is decorated with some things from Paris, and she just started kindergarten. And I was happy that we were able to get her in a school that has language immersion from kindergarten up to middle school. And so she'll be learning, she's in the French track, and she'll be learning French from like 5-year-olds onwards. So English, I'm very pleased because that also will help me to now learn with her and get to practice and kind of bring some of my French into the fore, because Spanish has been that for me in the last number of years.
I very much like that point, and I would really love to reiterate that for anybody listening, that it's not just, like you said, allowing yourself to, oh, okay, Spanish speaking opportunities come at me, but you actively seek that out and you actively put yourself in those situations where that's going to be the situation that you need to be in the sense of, oh, well, I don't have any chance to practice. Well, I don't, so let's find it, let's look for it, let's force it almost so that I do have that chance. I create almost that opportunity to practice. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people struggle with, and potentially it is much easier within the country that speaks the language, of course. But even if you're not, like you said, there are communities or stores or locales that you can go to that you can maybe, like you said, one or two sentences, which hopefully still count. So that's a really wonderful point for forcing those opportunities. I very much like that.
And particularly, I think when you're living in a new country, the onus or the responsibility is on you, because obviously you're trying to learn the language. So you really have to take on that personal responsibility to do what it takes to put yourself in situations to get the support that you need. I know that there's online social groups where you can connect with other people, like people who speak English locally in the United States, but are trying to learn Spanish, and vice versa. You're maybe a Spanish speaker who's trying to learn English, and you can form a relationship with these people online, and both of you are learning from each other. So there are different opportunities out there, but you really have to take that responsibility to use technology. And I know there's lots of like Google Translate and so many things that are out there now, way more than I think I was aware of when I first started and trying to keep up my Spanish and French. There's so much available to Rosetta Stone. There's this app called Mango or Lingo, Duolingo,
Mm.
um, Google Translate. There's so much technology out there. So and plus also watching TV if you're trying to learn English, like really, watch educational programs, listen to the music. It really is an effort of just immersing yourself into that. And you would be surprised just learning a few words per day over time, it really does add up.
And I'd love to circle back, Simone, to what you said at the beginning with your profession, the work that you've been doing with immigration, and something that you just mentioned again here now, creating that connection with somebody new, with a stranger, of okay, hey, I can, teach you something, you can teach me something. And I'd really love to spin that in the direction of forming relationships with people, building rapport, and communicating with people in general, because even through your podcast, like you said, that you talk to people from all around the world with your work in the immigration department, I would imagine the exact same thing. And now, like you said, talking to people even from the same country, but just speaking different languages. Do you have any tips or any tricks for anybody listening on building that rapport, on communicating well, perhaps some pillars of communication that, okay, if you do X, Y, Z, you're good to go?
Yes, yes, yes. Let me kind of switch my mind to thinking about this here. I made some notes just to make sure I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm the expert on communication, but I can pull from my own life experiences and to give a tidbit about what the research is saying out there and so forth. So um all right, so it's very important, right, to communicate effectively, right, when you're living in a new country. And I know it's not easy. So let me first say that we know it can be challenging if you're learning English for the first time, right? You are even speaking a language that is not even in the same alphabet as English. So my heart goes out to you. But it is doable, right? I've seen people who speak, for example, Amharic that has a different, I have a friend who speaks Tigrinya from Ethiopia and Eritrea, Russian and other languages where, you know, different alphabets from English, and they've been successful in learning English. So just be encouraged and know that it is possible. It just means that you'll have to put the time in and really put the effort in immersing yourself in those spaces where you can really just absorb the culture and the language. And so it's important for you to, first understand that it's important to learn the language of the country that you're in. We did mention earlier that sometimes people are here 20 plus years and they're still not able to communicate in English because they only associate or put themselves around people who speak their own language. And so there's really no motivation for them to learn English. But it's important for you to learn that language because it will help you in your career. It will help you with your educational aspirations. And imagine when you have that language under your belt, you can then market yourself to be able to work, to get better jobs, to for promotions, et cetera, et cetera. The sky's the limit for you if you're in an English speaking country and you are able to then master that language. So, and cultural awareness is another thing that I would recommend for people as another pillar of effective communication. So really try to understand the cultural norms, values, and customs of the country that you're you're living in, right? I like to call it the adopted, your new adopted country aside from your birth country. So just try to put yourself around people who can help you ask questions if you don't understand. Use technology, social media, the internet, whatever reading that you can do to educate yourself about what is normal in that country. And I know that it tends to be different, for example, here in the United States, depending on the state that you're in or the city or the different groups that you're dealing with. But depending on what you are faced with for any given moment or day, just really make sure you do a little bit of a homework in educating yourself about what the culture is for that specific space or environment that you're in for that moment. Okay, very important. And then for language and cultural exchange, right? We encourage our immigrants to learn, you know, to do exchanges, right? With the culture that you're in. Like I mentioned before, that there are groups online where you can form relationships with people who are willing to teach you the language for the country that you're living in, and then also exchange the language that you have as a native speaker. And so both of you can add value to each other. So that cultural and language exchange is something that we encourage people to do. And then, building your network. It's very important for a lot of immigrants when they come to the country. I know we tend to depend on our families and friends, but try to venture outside of that, whether it's communities of faith or other social communities that are available to you. Like, try to connect. If you are taking the bus and you notice a building or a sign of something advertising something, or if somebody mentions something, or you ask question about where I could find information, go to the library, for example. Just try to, get out and go to fairs, to carnivals, to different cultural activities that people are putting on in your community, just to build your social network and the resources, and tap into the resources that are in your community. I remember when I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, I was in Silver Spring, and they had a plaza area where you had like different groups in the community who would come out, and they would put on their cultural demonstration, if you will, marches during Thanksgiving, when they had the Thanksgiving parade, and people would come out. Like, go out to things like that, expose yourself, broaden your perspective of who's living around you in your community, and just keep an open mind, and learn from those people who are around you. Tap into that rich tapestry of culture that's just available to you right there in your communities. Don't hide. I know sometimes, it can be a bit intimidating being in a new environment, but please, please, please try to get across that fear and engage in the communities that are around you. And we know it's not easy, so you'll have to practice some resilience and some patience in the process of learning the culture and the language of the new place that you find yourself. So just be patient with yourself, get lots of rest, exercise if you have to, get some mental health support if you have to, because I know at times, it can really challenge someone when you're in an environment where you feel like there's a language barrier or a huge cultural difference that just make you feel overwhelmed. We definitely understand that, but talk about it. If you find a friend or just some person around you who you can just kind of express the challenges that you're having, and try to do whatever you can to help your body and your mind handle the new challenges that you're dealing with. I mentioned exercise. I mentioned maybe going into nature, walking, seeking support from other people around you. And another tip I would mention as a pillar of effective communication is to just pay attention to nonverbal cues and gestures that people express when you're around them. And that will help you to adapt to, if you, for example, just watch when you express or say things a certain way, how people are responding. And I suppose that can be a double-edged sword, because some people interpreting what these nonverbal cues mean can be challenging as well. But just, you know, be observant and just be alert of your environments and how people might be communicating that they dislike or like things when you're interacting with them. And, you know, and then the other thing is to learn to advocate for yourself, to speak up. And, you know, being in the United States is, there's one thing that we all have to learn. I've had to learn. I come from a collectivist culture where self-promotion and really talking about yourself is not very natural for people who come from communal and collective cultures. And so, but here in the United States, a very important thing to survive and thrive is learning to advocate for yourself, right? And figuring out, you know, what skills and value you bring to the table. And so don't be shy. I know sometimes it might take you some time to build up that muscle. I've had to learn that, but this is an important skill that you'll need to have in order to be successful here in the United States. So learn to advocate for yourself and for others in your community who might not yet be comfortable with the language, and maybe perhaps you are. Learn to advocate for yourself and your community as well. And just maintain a growth mindset, you know. Just always be open and know that every day that you get up, you know, embrace the fact that it's a new opportunity for you to learn a new word in that language, for you to learn something new about the culture, for you to learn something about the food that people eat, how things are expressed and communicated, a new piece of information that might bring you closer to an educational aspiration or maybe a job that you might be looking for. There is so much information that's available, a wealth of information here in the United States. So we encourage you, maintain that growth mindset, be open and seek out information. Go to your library. The library is your friend. Or if you have a cell phone, you know, social media, Google, you know, there's so much information available to you. So be sure to take advantage of that and utilize technology in helping you to learn how to communicate, and lots of translation tools and learning, language learning apps that are available online that will help you to integrate into the new culture. And again, find your support system, and just be mindful that you might need to actively seek out professional developments. For example, learning how to write a resume, what's presentable and acceptable here in the United States, how are things expressed? And if you're not at the place where you are able to do that yourself, don't be shy or ashamed or fearful of asking for help. That's very important, to ask for people to help you to frame the skills that you bring from your country or the skills that you've acquired while you're here and learning the language, to then translate that on paper on a resume so that you'll be able to communicate that in a written form. So seek out professional development. You know, I know that, for example, in the Maryland area, there are professional development, like the Department of Labor, job centers are available for people who are seeking employment, to help you interviewing skills, resume writing skills, learning how to present yourself well. There's lots of information, so please take advantage of that. And then also the last thing I'll mention is cultural sensitivity. Very, very important. I know through my own personal experiences and through my interviews and listening to other research and conversations that are out there, that showing respect for the different cultural perspective that are in the new country or environment that you're living in is so important, and demonstrating that willingness to learn and adapt, to creating that rapport to the different types of people that you're interacting with. You know, showing interest in someone's culture goes a very long way in building rapport. Sometimes, you know, we interact with other cultures, and it's normal to feel that your culture in particular is superior to other people's culture. But please, humility goes a long way in learning to respect other people's cultures, be intrigued, you know, show interest in learning how they do things. And a lot of times I've learned through my curiosity of other people's culture, thus how many times I've been able to see similarities and be so intrigued by the new things that I'm learning about how this country or this culture does things. It goes such a long way in building rapport when people see that you honestly care about their culture and the way that they do things, the way they speak, the way they are as a person. They will bring you in, and that will open just that warmth of exchange that is needed for you to then go move forward in building that rapport and relationship with that person in order to facilitate that cultural exchange, that language exchange that's important for you to build and thrive in this country that you're in.
So there is so much to unpack here, and I love everything that you said because I feel like this is such wonderful advice from such a holistic point of view as well, not just the language, but the culture and the community and the relationships, like you said, networking and meeting other people. So I would highly recommend to anybody listening to rewind the last, I don't know, 10 to 15 20 minutes of what you were talking about because I feel like that was incredibly valuable. And I did find what you said very interesting with the collectivist cultures. And I find that that's typically a large issue, especially for those bigger countries, like you said, like the US or Australia, where many people, especially in the case of Australia, many people coming from Asia, they have what you are talking about, that okay, I'm not supposed to be talking about myself too much, I'm not supposed to, be too flamboyant, versus in Australia it's, I'm this and I'm that and I'm here and look at me. So can you maybe, for anybody listening that is in that boat, what would you suggest to get over that fear perhaps of showing yourself?
Right, right. Well, my very own journey. I remember being in a job where the expectation was that I had to write my own evaluation. And I hadn't had to do that in other jobs before. And it, I mean, for lack of a better term, it freaked me out. And I struggled with that for years. I'm very enthusiastic of, showing my value and working and being on time and putting in the work. But when it came to me sitting down and writing my evaluation and then turning the mirror on myself and now speaking and like, basically speaking highly of myself, oh my gosh, that was so difficult. I'm still struggling with that today. But you know what changed for me? I realized that I was living in a new place, that this was a requirement for me. And if I didn't learn how to do that and how to thrive in doing that, you have to be, people would, in the American space, people would say you have to toot your own horn, or you have to be able to speak up for yourself, to show what skills you have, because no one else will be able to do that for you. In fact, right? When you're sitting in that chair, no one else can actually speak about the skills and value that you bring except you. You know yourself better than everybody else. So you have to really do some internal work and try to reframe in your mind the perspective that you have. I know, from a collectivist culture, it's not necessarily a conversation we have where people tell you that you can't speak of yourself. You just know naturally it's about the group, and whatever you do, it's to make the group look good, it's to make your family look good. And so we're so innately used to doing that. But here in the United States, the individual is all of a sudden, you're pushed to the forefront. And so you being that person and being that unique person in the United States, and to show your unique value in the Western world, is very important. And so I had to do some coaching, like work with people who were comfortable in doing this. And really, and the part of my challenge was that I couldn't necessarily put words to my skills, right? I knew I speak Spanish. I knew I had this degree. You're right. That's very easy to talk about, okay? You put that on a resume. But when it comes down to really looking at your skill set and presenting it in a way that will communicate to that employer that you are the person for the job, I found that to be very challenging because I wasn't used to doing that. And so I had to seek out coaching. I had to work with somebody to really sit down with me, look at my resume, and to show me, Simone, you have this amazing set of skills based on your experiences, and you're not necessarily communicating that. And so working with someone to give you the language to help build your confidence in that space could be, sometimes it will take you literally paying somebody who is very skilled at doing that so that you can learn that skill. So don't be shy to invest in yourself. You will hear that a lot here in the West. Investing in yourself is very important to then learn those skills that you don't currently have. And don't be shameful about it. It's just you're in a new environment. And in order to thrive here, this is the person that you need to grow in, which is why that growth mindset is so important, right? It might take you a little time, but I've had to adjust myself when I'm in a certain setting. Like if I go back to the island, or if I'm in a certain group of people where the community or the communal mindset is like very strong, then you kind of tone it down, and in that space you can't necessarily speak too much of yourself. Just kind of vibe with the group and try to, which is why observing people and look and reading the room, as they would say, reading the people who are around you and how they're communicating and what is important in that setting is so important. But I've had to seek out professional help. I've had to do a lot of self-help reading, and to over time build my confidence. It doesn't come overnight. I still struggle with it at times. Believe it or not, I've had to learn to speak of my value succinctly, like concisely, because sometimes you end up going into telling a story about who you are. But here in the United States, you have to be able to speak very briefly about the skills that you bring and how that then translates to bringing value to a workplace, to a social setting, whatever space you may be in. You have to be able to sell yourself, as they say. And so, don't be shy. Don't feel ashamed about it. It's just the world that you're now in. And this is part of the skill that you now need to develop in order to thrive here and to become successful. So seek the help that you need.
And what would you say through that self-work that you've done, and like you said, the reading and then the professional coaching, what have you found to be your favorite part of yourself? To be a little bit open here, what do you most like about your own personality?
Mm. Starting the podcast has really just brought so much like full circle for me.
Mm.
I actually didn't realize just how much immigration had followed me. My journey being an immigrant in the United States, my journey studying immigration because I was just intrigued by international business and what was going on with other cultures. And this thing has followed me my entire life. And I just find now just how naturally I'm able to express myself just by being able um, to look back on my journey, my own personal journey, and just how much value that has in it. I don't need to do research paper. I don't need to go to the library to learn about this. I have walked the immigrant journey. I've studied it. I've worked in the space. This is my value. And it basically like oozes out of me because I have walked it. I've lived it. I've struggled in it. I've had triumphs in it, right? And so for a lot of our listeners, that will be part of your story. And so embrace it, right? Don't be ashamed of it. Embrace it. It's part of who you are uniquely on this earth. It will advise what you end up doing in your life. And so just don't shy away from the fact that you have to learn a new language. They say that learning a new language actually helps people's brain. It helps build new neural path. If we're getting into that, psychological space. neuropsych space, but they do say it really does help your brain to develop. So it is a plus. It's challenging, yes, but if you get to the other side of it, it's going to be prove to be quite a skill for you, right? And so I will underline that by see if you're struggling right now and you need help. I know sometimes immigrants might not be able to have the financial resources, but there's a lot of groups available out there to you. So go to the library, take advantage of the technology that you have in your hand, seek out social groups and other people who are willing to exchange, do an even exchange of the language with the language that you have. It doesn't always have to be about money, but people will do other exchanges with you for the value that you bring to learn from your culture and your language, and then you teach them from your culture and your language. So you do have a lot of value. So, just open your eyes and see. Don't feel ashamed of it. It is a very big plus to who you are as a person and your story.
And that's an incredibly valuable message because I feel like a lot of people tend to have that self-doubt or self-critique that, oh, I'm not good enough or I'm not as good as these people that were born here, or I'm just an immigrant, I'm nobody here. But like you said, in reality, there are so many incredible positives to it that people living in one country their entire lives cannot begin to comprehend, I would wager. So that's a really, really perfect way of putting it in essence, that like you said, it's not the negative side that, oh, you don't belong or anything like that, but your brain actually gets better in a
And it
sense.
does.
So
Right.
perfect.
And I know sometimes the social pressures around you might be sending a lot of messages to you that you're not as skilled or you're not as able to communicate readily right now. But for each day that passes that you put in the work, you eventually will get there, So just be patient with yourself and put in the work that you need to and seek the support and help that you need to, and you'll be surprised you'll get there.
And Simone, for anybody listening that wants to listen to more of your wisdom and to more of your beautiful words of advice, where can people find you?
So I want to just put a plug in there for my podcast, right? It's called The Immigrant Experience in America, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants living in the United States and around the world. And we've done a lot of interviews that will be encouraging and inspiring to you on your immigrant journey. So check us out. We're on all platforms, whether it's Apple, Google, Spotify, we're on Audible, we're on Amazon Podcasts. You can just tell Alexa, play The Immigrant Experience in America. She'll play it for you. And now we have a YouTube channel, the same name, The Immigrant Experience in America, on YouTube. So check us out there as well. I'm also on LinkedIn, Simone W. Johnson Smith. So you can connect with me there as well. And I'm on other platforms. I'm on TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, under my podcast handle. It'll be The Immigrant Experience in America. That's where you'll find me there. But specifically on LinkedIn, you'll find me by name, Simone W. Johnson Smith. But it's been a pleasure being on here with you, Marty, and I hope my words will encourage, inspire, and just let people know that, this is a very intriguing and inspiring journey that you're on, and don't give up on yourself. You'll get to the other side of it.
I have zero doubt that it has done all of these things that you just mentioned. And I do want to thank you for your time also, Simone. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to you and to your experiences and to your words of advice. So thank you very much. And I will talk to you again soon. Hey, I'm glad to see you here. Let me know what you most enjoyed about this conversation. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. Do zobaczenia.